I am standing in my apartment on a quiet Saturday morning when the doorbell rings. I open the door and freeze. My father, my mother, and my brother are standing there. 7 years of silence, and now they show up looking worn and desperate. Their clothes are faded, their faces tired, their eyes pleading. I remember the night I left home with $20 in my pocket. Now they need something from me. But do I owe them anything after what they did? Before we begin this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If stories about family betrayal and finding your own strength speak to you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, to the moment I realized my own family saw me as nothing more than a paycheck. My name is Angus, and I grew up in a small town just outside Columbus, Ohio. Our family lived in a modest one-story house with peeling paint and a lawn that always needed mowing. My father, Harold, worked as a plumber, and my mother, Donna, stayed home to take care of the house and us kids. Us kids meant me and my younger brother, Kyle, who was 4 years younger than me. From as far back as I can remember, there was always a difference in how we were treated. When Kyle wanted a new toy, he got it. When I asked for the same thing, I was handed down whatever Kyle had outgrown. If Kyle cried, my parents rushed to comfort him. If I cried, my father would look at me with hard eyes and say that men do not show weakness. I learned early to swallow my tears and keep my feelings locked inside. My father had a favorite phrase he used whenever I questioned why Kyle got special treatment. He would say that Kyle was still young and that I was the older brother, so I had to make sacrifices. I believed him. I thought that was just what older siblings did. I thought if I worked hard enough and gave enough, eventually my parents would see my value and appreciate me. When I turned 14, I started working odd jobs around the neighborhood. I delivered newspapers before school. I mowed lawns on weekends. I shoveled snow in the winter. Every dollar I earned, I handed over to my mother. She said she was keeping it safe for the family, that we all needed to contribute. I never saw any of that money come back to me. Not for new shoes when mine wore out, not for school supplies, not for anything. Kyle, on the other hand, never had to lift a finger. While I was out working in the summer heat, he sat inside playing video games. When I asked my father why Kyle did not have to work too, he had an answer ready. He told me Kyle struggled in school and needed time to focus on his studies. He said I was smart and capable, so I could handle the extra responsibility. It did not matter that Kyle spent his free time gaming instead of studying. The rules were different for him, and I was expected to accept that. Despite everything, I held on to hope. I told myself that things would change when I got older. I worked hard in school, earning good grades while juggling my part-time jobs. When I graduated high school, I received a partial scholarship to the local community college. It was not much, but it was my ticket to something better. My father had other ideas. He sat me down the week before classes started and told me I did not need college. He said I should get a full-time job and help support the family. I looked at my mother, hoping she would speak up for me. She just stared at her hands and said nothing. I refused to give up my dream. I enrolled in classes anyway, attending during the day and working the night shift at a warehouse. I barely slept. I lived on coffee and determination. But I kept going because I believed that a degree would open doors and lead me to a life where I could finally breathe. While I was exhausting myself trying to build a future, Kyle dropped out of high school. He claimed he could not handle the pressure. My parents did not push him to get a job or go back to school. Instead, they made excuses for him. They said he just had not found his passion yet. They said he needed time to figure things out. Meanwhile, he spent his days sleeping until noon and his nights hanging out with friends. The double standard was so obvious it hurt, but I kept my mouth shut and focused on my goals. After 2 years of grinding through classes and overnight shifts, I graduated with my associate degree. A week later, I landed a job at a logistics company. The starting salary was $36,000 a year. It was not a fortune, but to me, it felt like the beginning of everything I had worked for. For the first time in my life, I felt like the future was bright. 1 week after I received my first paycheck, my father called a family meeting. We gathered in the living room, and I could tell by the look on his face that this was serious. He cleared his throat and announced that since I was now the only one in the family with a stable income, I needed to contribute my fair share. I nodded, expecting him to ask for maybe 30 or 40% to help with bills. I was prepared to do my part, but the number that came out of his mouth made my stomach drop. 85%. He wanted 85% of my paycheck. I would keep only 15% for myself. He explained that the money would go toward rent, utilities, groceries, and supporting Kyle until my brother found his footing. I tried to negotiate. I suggested 50%, which was still more than generous. My father's face turned red with anger. He accused me of being selfish and ungrateful. He reminded me that I lived under his roof, ate his food, and owed him everything. I looked at my mother, silently begging her to intervene. She kept her eyes on the floor and stayed silent. Kyle sat in the corner, scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention. When he finally looked up, he smirked and said, "I should just share, since that is what family does." Against every instinct screaming inside me, I agreed. I could not bear the thought of losing my family over money. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Kyle would get a job soon and things would balance out. For the next 2 years, I handed over 85% of every paycheck to my father. I worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes 6 days a week, trying to earn enough overtime to survive on the scraps I kept for myself. I could not afford a car, so I took the bus for 2 hours each way to get to work. I could not save money. I could not plan for the future. I was trapped. During those same 2 years, my father bought Kyle a used car. The excuse was that Kyle needed transportation to look for jobs. But Kyle never looked for work. He used that car to hang out with friends, go on dates, and live a life funded entirely by my labor. He started dating someone and suddenly needed money for nice clothes and restaurant dinners. That money came from me, though I never agreed to it. One evening, I worked up the courage to ask my father if I could reduce my contribution. I explained that I wanted to save up for my own car so I could cut my commute and maybe take on more shifts. His reaction was explosive. He called me selfish. He said, "I only thought about myself." He accused me of wanting to abandon my family. My mother patted my shoulder gently and whispered that I should try a little harder, that Kyle would be fine soon. Her words felt like salt in an open wound. I nodded and said nothing more. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I came home early because my shift was canceled. As I walked through the front door, I heard voices in the kitchen. I stopped in the hallway and listened. My father was sitting at the table counting a thick stack of cash. He peeled off several bills and handed them to Kyle. He told my brother to go buy an engagement ring for his girlfriend. I stood frozen in the doorway. The money my father was giving away so casually was money I had earned, money I had sacrificed sleep and health and any chance at a normal life to make, and it was going toward an engagement ring for Kyle. Kyle noticed me first. He grinned and thanked our father, adding that it was nice that I worked so hard. There was no guilt in his voice, only mockery. My father turned and saw me. He did not flinch. He did not apologize. He simply said that Kyle was ready to start a family, and as the older brother, it was my duty to help make that happen. Something inside me shattered. Every ounce of hope I had been holding onto for years crumbled into dust. I finally saw the truth clearly. I was not a son to them. I was not a brother. I was just a source of income, a machine they could drain until there was nothing left. That night, I told my father I would only contribute 30% of my salary going forward. I spoke calmly, but my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. He slammed his hand on the table so hard the dishes rattled. He shouted that I lived in his house and ate his food and had no right to refuse. He said I was an ungrateful child who did not understand sacrifice. I stood my ground. I told him I worked 12 hours a day and deserved to keep what I earned. Kyle jumped in, calling me selfish and saying I did not deserve to be called a brother. My father gave me an ultimatum. Either I continued giving 85%, or I could leave and never come back. I looked at my mother one last time. Her eyes met mine for just a second before she turned away. In that moment, I understood that she would never defend me. She had chosen her side long ago. I went upstairs to my room. I packed my clothes into a backpack. I took the $20 I had hidden in a sock drawer. Then I walked out the front door. As I stepped onto the porch, my father shouted after me. He told me never to return unless I learned how to behave. I did not look back. I just kept walking. I reached the bus stop at 11 o'clock that night. It was November, and the cold cut through my thin jacket like a blade. I had no home. I had no family. I had $20 and a backpack full of clothes. For the first time in my life, I was completely alone. That first night, I slept on a bench at the bus station.